Okay, oops. Hopefully that's working. Oops, let's get that. It's working. Hopefully all that's going. Let me know if things aren't working. It's been a trial and error this morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky. I'm glad to be back. The past few weeks I've finally caught the COVID and was under the weather, but knock on wood, I'm feeling much better, ready to get back to painting with you today. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking and trying to recreate one of my favorite paintings by one of my favorite artists, William Kurelek. And this painting, Teaching Ukrainian, this is actually kind of a edited version of it. This is the original. I used Photoshop to expand the image, and then I also changed the colors and inserted the Ukrainian trident up in the corner again. That's what the original looked like, so lots of room for interpretation. You could paint this like the original if you like, or you could paint my reinterpretation of it. And then there's the template, but we'll talk about all that here very shortly. Let's talk about the plan for today's episode. Lots of familiar faces in the chat there. That's great. So in a couple seconds, we're going to talk about how difficult today's painting is, and if this is indeed something you want to try doing with us today. We'll talk about materials required very briefly, because I did a whole episode talking about that. We'll do the image transfer, then we'll stain it with some color, then we'll talk about Kurelek's biography, and there's and I always say I try to be brief, but there is a lot to say, so I'll try to keep my words as succinct as possible, which we know won't happen, but I'll do my best to be mindful. And then we're going to get to the painting itself. We'll probably do a little bit of an underpainting, and then we're going to bounce back and forth between background, foreground a number of times, because there is a lot of detail. I'm thinking if I can get this all wrapped up in the next 6 hours, that would be awesome. I know it sounds like a long time, but to do something like Kurelek's work, and this is probably one of the simplest paintings I was able to find of his work as well. So 6 hours, I think, especially depending if I can keep my words brief, would be amazing. Just before we get started as well, just a quick reminder to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know when future episodes are taking place. Usually between 60 to 80% of the people watching right now, maybe that's you, are not subscribers to the channel. It doesn't cost you anything, but it can really help reach more people and help transform our communities and lives. The more we're interested and actively making art together, so consider doing that at your convenience, as well as the like button. If you do, however, want to support the channel with a small donation, a couple of dollars or so, you can use the PayPal link there. You can scan that QR code or enter in that web address. There is a link down below in the description for that as well. It'll take you to the PayPal page where you can safely, securely donate to support the channel. And thank you to all of those of you who have been generous supporters over the years. And you know, I was just looking in the comments there. Senga donated through the super chat, which we'll talk about here in a second. Barbara's donated as well, very generously. So I'm very, very grateful. You know, this is a brand new camera we're using here because you might have noticed the last few episodes there was the camera just died. So, you know, which is not too bad after almost 5 years of continuous use. 5 years, I think, is pretty good. You know, work out of one camera. Other ways you could donate: you can donate using sending an e-transfer or check in the mail in order to get my address or mailing address, as well as or email address. All of those links are down there below. And of course, YouTube super chat while we're live also works. I also want to do a quick shout out for the Facebook group. I think the most recent episode I did was one of our free feedback bonus episodes where I went through everything that was on our Facebook group and gave people free advice on how to improve their artwork, as well as just celebrating your achievements. Because, as I said, anybody who's doing anything creative is doing something positive for the world. That's what the Facebook group looks like. I encourage you to join that. There's a very supportive, very large, growing community of people at various stages of their creative process and their journey. And it's a great place to get some support and feedback as well. Okay, so let's talk about how difficult today's painting is. So here's our scale of difficulty. And you know, we start at the beginner and we go to novice, intermediate, advanced, and then expert. Your beginner, never seen me before, never painted before, has no idea at all about color. This painting, not for you. You could try it, but just have basically zero expectations of being able to recreate what we see here in the original. A novice, somebody who's, you know, done a couple of the introductory episodes, learned about mixing colors, done the color wheel, has an idea about what I'm talking about when I talk about color temperature, when I'm talking about warm and cool colors. If you've never heard of those terms before, today's painting probably not for you. So I've labeled today's painting as an intermediate painting. And intermediate, to be fair, is where a lot of artists are, right? Once we kind of get through those initial stages and then we kind of doing a lot of painting, you know, you can be kind of a beginner intermediate and a very advanced intermediate. And most artists spend most of their career probably in that intermediate phase. And so that's where we're going to be in here, right? You've done a couple paintings with me before. You're starting to feel a little bit of confidence. You're starting to understand some of the basic key concepts that we've been talking about throughout these episodes. Obviously, if you're an advanced artist or an expert, a master like Kurelek himself, this painting, I wouldn't say is easy, but it's doable. Right, and it's probably not going to cause you too much anxiety or fretting. Okay. Oh, lots of new names in the chat as well. Clowny Clown. Hello. Awesome. Cool. It feels like it's been forever since I did one of these episodes, so everything just is a little bit off and trying to get everything sorted again. So let's talk briefly about materials required to do a painting like this. Now, again, I did an entire hour-and-a-half long episode diving into great depths about this. So I'm just going to do a 5-minute quick summary because maybe you are watching for the first time and you kind of just want an idea of what's required to do something like this. So you could scan this QR code. It's going to go to the Dropbox folder where everything's free, and at the very top of that folder is a PDF that you can download and print out or look at on your phone that has information about what you need to buy and where to get it and all that kind of stuff. But it just essentially, this is an acrylic painting class, so obviously we're going to be using acrylic paint, and we're going to be painting on a canvas, which I realized I just don't have. One second. Come on. See, there's always something missing. So I'm going to be painting on a 9x12 sized canvas. I like these particular ones, these Fixsmith canvases. There is a link in the description for them. This is one of the only things that I buy off of Amazon in terms of art supplies. Most other art supplies are way overpriced on Amazon, so just before you start clicking that buy now button, just be careful, because you should easily be able to find it for maybe 1/3 the price at your local art supply store, or order online from your local art supply store. I'm not sure if we're going to use any of that. Again, I always go out of my way to recommend having some rags, paper towels, anything to clean up when the inevitable disaster happens and you accidentally knock over your painting, your cup of water or anything like that. And it almost always happens when you're 10 minutes away from finishing your painting too. Just keep that in mind. When you're just about like, oh, I'm almost done, this is going great. You could set your timer, okay, countdown to disaster. So having a rag or two ready to go. We're going to be using what's called a split primary palette. I didn't invent this concept, but I'm definitely on a personal mission to make this the standard, at least for beginner artists. I wish I knew about this 30 years ago when I was just starting out as an artist, when I was in high school. I think every junior high student should know this, because it simplifies the painting process radically. And I went to art school and then graduate art school, and no one ever talked about any of this stuff. And it wasn't until I started teaching myself, trying to figure out how do I explain everything I've learned in the most simple way possible. And I stumbled on, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I gotta make sure everybody knows about this. So essentially we need 6-7 tubes of paint. We need 2 yellows, 2 reds, 2 blues, plus white. And we can even mix our own blacks, but you can obviously buy a tube of black paint if you want as well. Although I'm gonna be mixing my own blacks today. The reason why we're going to use 2 yellows, 2 reds, 2 blues is because what we've done is split those so-called primary colors in half into their warm and cool components. Every color is either warm or cool, or you can think of it as every color has kind of leans towards orange or towards green. And understanding this is the key to creating depth in your painting, even if you're making abstract paintings. Because warm colors appear to advance towards the viewer, cool colors appear to recede. So all you have to ask yourself is, when I'm mixing a color, where is it in so-called space? Is it in the background? If so, then I'm going to use my 3 cool colors to mix that color. If it's in my foreground, I'm going to use my 3 warm colors to mix that color. And if it's kind of in between the foreground and background, what we call the middle ground, then it's going to be a combination thereof, right? Okay, I'm going to speed through all of these different paint brands. Again, all of this information is in the Dropbox folder. I'm going to be using these Amsterdam acrylic paints, Amsterdam Standard, which is a Dutch company. And makes sense, right? Royal Talons is the kind of larger umbrella company. And but of course you can use other brands. These are kind of my recommendations for all of these other brands of paint out there. I haven't used all of these brands, but I haven't heard anybody complain or have difficulties with any of these suggestions here. I've just gone on to the various different websites for different paint companies and identified the colors I would suggest you use to be able to replicate what we're doing here on camera. However, you're going to see here in just a couple seconds, there are some brands that do not work, and for the most part, it's just really, really cheap brands of paint. Paints that you might find at the dollar store, right? Yeah, they are cheap for a reason, right? And so, however, there are two brands here, Museum Color, which is a smaller brand out of Canada, and Peebo, which is one of the largest paint brands on earth. Both of these are well, they're not terrible, but you just won't be able to mix a black. These colors have a lot of extra white that they've put in there as a filler, as well as Mary's and Fevicryl, and again, any dollar store paint. So if you're mixing a lot of pastel colors, you're going to love these paints. But if you're trying to get really bright, saturated colors, then it's going to be kind of frustrating. So just putting that out there, that, and of course, as I said, you know, pretty much every paint company adds a little bit of titanium white as a filler in there to make their paint more opaque. So it doesn't necessarily mean the paint is bad. Even more expensive paints might do this, but just these brands just did way too much. And I'm particularly disappointed in Peebo because it is such a massive brand that clearly they're just doing that to cut corners and save money. So there's plenty of other brands that you can use that work very, very well. Pascal's there. Oh yeah, and I forgot, Kathy also sent in a sizable donation recently as well, so I wanted to make mention of that too. So many names in the chat, I get lost in there. Okay. Our next step is, or really our first step really, is to do the image transfer. So you could take my free drawing course here on YouTube. It's by far the most popular thing I've ever done in my life. Millions of people have taken those episodes. However, this is a painting class, and in order just to kind of skip over some of the difficulties of getting an image onto the canvas, especially if you're a little bit on the more novice side of things, then what we want to do is download the free template that I've created that's on the Dropbox. You could scan this QR code or enter in that web address. It'll take you to the Dropbox, and let's take a look at that right now. Okay, so as I said, your supply guide's right at the top there. That has all the information I just quickly skimmed over. And then you're going to notice that there's, I don't know, 300 plus folders in here, and there's they begin with the first name of the artist and then the last name, and then you'll see that they are identified by the scale of difficulty, right? So you'll see there's some that say number 1 beginner, number 2 advanced, number 3 intermediate, number 4 advanced. Did I say number 1 advanced? I'm 1 beginner. So let's scroll all the way down here towards the very end. Here's William Kurelek. We click in the folder. You're going to see a number of different files, because what I've done here is included not only the image, the tracing that I did using my iPad Pro and the Procreate app. I just traced over these lines. But the image that I'm going to attempt to recreate today, but I've also included the original as well as kind of a composite here where I expanded the image using Photoshop. And of course there's also a PDF and JPEG version of these. So once you download that template, we're going to transfer it onto Canvas here. And I'll show you how to do that. Let me get those books out of the way. Stephanie there? Is the screen frozen? I hope not. Let me know if things are not working for you. Okay, so as I said, I printed this out on just regular photocopy paper. I'm using this 9x12 sized canvas board or canvas panel. You can buy these from your local dollar store. The difference is that, you know, instead of spending $1 on a cheap one from the dollar store, you buy one of these slightly more expensive ones for $2 a piece, and they're much better, and they're gonna last a lot longer. So that's my recommendation, is just to spend a couple extra quarters and get a superior quality. Of course, you could buy them, spend a lot more money, like $5-6 on a single one. I think that's overkill, and the quality is not really gonna be there. So okay, I'm actually just trying to decide. Yeah, I think I'll just put this in the middle. I was just debating, should I shift this? You know, I think I will just shift it over just a little bit. I want to make sure that she's, or that the mother and son here are as close to the center as possible. Okay. And so I'm using here a piece of carbon paper, carbon graphite transfer paper, and now I'm going to trace over this image. This can be really time consuming. The thing to remember is we're going to paint over all of these lines, so I'm not going to worry about getting every line on here possible. I'm going to skip over a number of these lines. Let's make sure that's in focus. I had a really hard time trying to figure out where the eyes were on this little boy. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there, but you'll let me know where you think the eyes are in this image. It's a good idea to just check it, you know, especially towards the beginning of this process, that you got the carbon paper, graphite paper right side up, because I can't tell you how many times I myself or other people have spent, you know, a half hour doing the outline transfer here, only to realize that the carbon paper was upside down, and that's a pretty discouraging way to get started. So if you can avoid that issue, you'll be very happy. You don't really realize how frustrating that is until it happens, and then it's like, oh my goodness, how did I let that happen? I'm just thinking to myself about the tablecloth. Do I want to put all those lines on there? I think I will. I'm just kind of trying to avoid it for the moment. Now I might just do the interior. Am I going to regret not using a ruler here is the question. Maybe. We'll see. Okay. Yeah, good. I was gonna say there. I mean, there's little details that I didn't transfer, but like in the lamp, for instance. But that's okay. So let's go to the next step here. Now that I've got my image on the canvas, the next step here is to stain it with a little bit of color. Now you don't need to do this, but it is definitely one of my favorite parts of the painting process, and I've been doing this for years, and I'm certainly not the only one. You know, if we look at the history of art, the Imprimatura was one of the most significant kind of steps in the early part of the painting process. Essentially, as far as I use it, it's just part of my routine these days, but traditionally artists would stain the canvas as a way of imbuing it with a little bit of color, particularly if you're doing landscape or portrait painting, and those colors might kind of show through various different layers of paint, and sometimes can be a really big time-saving device. I think it also, and especially for our purposes, is helpful because it makes beginner paintings look more advanced. Because if there's little gaps between the colors, instead of there just being the plain white of the canvas, you've got an extra little bit of color there. And that just sort of makes, you know, a viewer looking at it like, oh, wow, there's something more complex going on here. And I think if you're a beginner painter, you want to grasp at anything that's going to help make your paintings look just a little bit more professional. Now, lots of artists did not do this, did not do the Imprimatura, especially over the last 100 years or so. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, doesn't mean you have to do it either, right? I'm just going to take a quick look here at the original. I would say probably Kurelek. I don't know if he used this process at all. So I think you could definitely be forgiven for not doing it. It's very hard to see. Let's take a look at the original. I mean, he would have definitely learned this technique. Whether he did it, though, is another thing altogether. The original, the image that we're working from here is fairly low quality, so that does make it really hard. What I'm looking for right now is I'm trying to see, like, in between different colors, almost like in between the puzzle pieces, if I can see any evidence of colors or just plain white of the canvas, and I can't really tell here. I, though, would suspect that it's probably just painting directly onto the white canvas. I don't know. That's, again, it's very hard to know for sure. So, let's just dive in and do this. Now, typically what I like to do is to use my warm yellow, and about 2 minutes before we went live, my the palette that I normally use to mix colors fell down behind the table, and I'm like, I'm already half hour behind. Let's just start painting. And, you know, but you can just use a little lid like this. Yeah, that's enough. You probably would use a little bit more paint on there, but... And then I'm just going to add, you know, roughly about 40% water to acrylic paint. This is the only time I ever use water when I'm painting with acrylic. There's no law against using water, but it is generally recommended that instead of using water to paint with, that you would use some other kind of medium. Just keep in mind that acrylic paint is water-based and water-soluble, and we use water to clean our brushes and such. So the more water you introduce into your paint, the more you're breaking down the glue that basically holds the paint together. And especially if you add a lot, I often notice that acrylic paint starts to look really grainy, right? Because basically the glue is so diluted that that the pigment, which is usually kind of powdered, is no longer suspended in that glue, and is just sort of now sitting on the surface all by itself. The reason why I use water with this stage is because the Imprimatura is less of a painting technique and more of a staining technique. And, you know, people might say, well, what's the difference between staining and painting? Well, just think about if you've ever kind of refurbished an old piece of furniture. Stain is like, let's say you've got an old desk or something, and you want to preserve the wood grain, then you want to stain that surface so that the wood grain might even become more prominent, versus paint generally covers up and sits on top. Stain soaks in, paint sits on top. And since what I'm trying to do in part is cover up all of the white paint, or the white canvas, or I guess white gesso, I want this to really soak into the surface and get in around that weave and create as seamless of a surface as possible. There's Betty says, I think I'm going to love this. I'm Elizabeth from Napier, South Africa. Wow, that's so cool. You're all the way on the, I mean, for me, on the other side of the world. That's so cool. That's one of the things I just love about these episodes is there are people right now watching from pretty much every continent on Earth. And to be able to interact with people in real time on the other side of the world is just, I just feel super blessed to have that opportunity. So, strap in Brady. Strap in Betty, says Barbara. This guy is awesome. Oh my goodness. Barbara, you are too sweet. Okay, I'm just going to put some of my colors on my palette right now before I move on. And it's probably too much, but I'll explain what I'm doing once I figure out what it is that I'm doing here. Trying to get, I think I'm going to do another layer of color on top of this. So I'm just prepping that in my mind. I don't always use all of the colors that I put here on my palette. Although, and so, you know, you could, if you're watching this episode after it's aired, just go to the very end and just see, is there any paint that hasn't been touched? Okay, well, I just won't put that paint on my palette. I do, however, find that almost always I use a little bit of each color. I prefer having all of those paints on my palette at the start of the process. Just so that I'm not like, oh, I'm in the thick of the creative process, and then it's like, oh, hold on, let me squeeze some paint out. You know, I want to be kind of prepared, and but that's me. Okay. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to blow dry this here, get this as dry as possible. And then I'm going to do another layer, a bit more of like an old newspaper kind of color that I'm going to cover this with. So I'm just going to use my hair dryer here. I'm going to mute the audio for a moment. So you probably saw me just trying to, you know, wiping the edges. I'm just trying to avoid having any, sometimes drips of paint form on the sides. And if we're going to do another layer of paint, I just want to make sure that those colors don't just mix directly into this paint. Okay. So I'm going to mix just a little bit of a brown here. So I'm taking my warm yellow, warm red, and warm blue. Just mixing that in here. This brush still has quite a lot of yellow on it. So I just mixed up this color. We would call this like unbleached titanium, which is basically titanium white before it's bleached, right? And gets, you know, it's like whole wheat bread versus your white bread, right? We're just and so we get, and then I just added probably double the amount of matte medium. Matte medium is essentially what's in acrylic paint before they put the color in it. And I did that because there's a lot of white in here, and if I just paint that white, I'm just going to cover up my pencil lines, and it's like, why did I spend 10 minutes tracing those lines if I'm only to later cover it up almost instantly? Now the question could be like, why not do this first and then my pencil lines? Great question. I mean, that's just a brilliant question. You got to be careful when you use the carbon paper on top of paint. It has a bit of a tendency to stick, even if the paint is dry. The carbon paper can stick, and then you peel it off, and then you've got like almost like rubbings of color on there. So I just want to try to avoid that if I can. So now I'm just going to cover this surface. You know, if you're painting it and you're like, oh, I can't see my lines anymore, right? Well, one thing to do is to do this as quickly as possible, and then to try to blend out. You know, it's like putting icing on a cake or something that you want to then go and try to spread it out so that you don't just have a big blob on there. I mean, I've been doing this for years, so I have a kind of intuitive sense as to how much medium to put in. You know, obviously, I wasn't using a measuring cup or anything. That's something, again, that comes with experience. So just before I move on, I'm just going to go in here and scoop up the rest of this paint. Try to make a little pile of it in case I want to use this later. Maybe to fix a problem, right? If I've got this, if it's just sitting there, it's going to dry out and it won't be useful at all within minutes. Here, if I've kind of made a little, you know, I've consolidated it together, then I do have a little bit more of an opportunity to use that later on. Again, it's always a good idea to clean your brushes, I think, while you're, you know, as soon as you're not using it, so that it can sit there and it can dry without you having to worry about the paint hardening on the brush, which basically destroys the brush. And so that if you do want to use it, it's all ready. It's kind of start to dry up a little bit and ready to go as soon as you want it. Okay, I'm just going to quickly blow dry this, and then we're going to move on and talk a little bit about Kurelik's Biography. So, you know, this might be a little bit hard to see these lines on camera right now. I can see them, and also as I blow dry it, that paint should kind of get a little bit clearer as well. Sorry, my audio is off. Okay, so I was just saying there, Pascal was talking about adding these chemicals into the water, anti-graffiti spray and floor cleaner, to help with the brush cleaning process in your water. I was just suggesting that I would discourage that kind of thing, because those are some pretty nasty chemicals, and I wouldn't want any of that stuff in my working environment if I can help it. I would suggest just cleaning your brush in water after you use it, and then after every one of these episodes, even if it's like 6-7 hours later, I just take brush. It might already be dry if I've cleaned it in my water, and I just use some soap and water. And I mean, I've had this brush for 6 years, and I've used this for pretty much every single painting that we start. Almost all these brushes I've used for years, and they're fine, right? And you know how many 500 plus episodes we've done here. So anyway, I would just discourage using such harsh chemicals when you're painting. Not only those chemicals can be really irritating on your skin, but they also can be dangerous to inhale. So you really want to have a very well ventilated space. And if you're going to mix those chemicals in, you probably want to wear latex gloves to protect your hands. And again, most people use acrylic paint because it is generally much safer to use than oil paint. So if you're going to use acrylic paint, you take advantage of that rather than adding all of these really dangerous chemicals into your working process. I would suggest. Pascal says, okay, I'm painting cleaning wrong then. The paint accumulated in the hairs. Yeah, I think, obviously the paint will accumulate in there, but if you're cleaning your brush within like a few minutes of using it, your brush will be fine for years. It's only when brushes just sit on your table for hours and hours and hours before you clean them that then you do need those harsh chemicals. Those harsh chemicals are also going to wreck the brush too, right? Because they're really only used for like stripping paint that's completely dried on brick walls and sidewalks and stuff. So it's really kind of overkill, I think. I saw another comment earlier here. Krish says, "Hi, old man. I am watching your little bit drawing playlist. I'm 31 video. Thanks you and love you forever. Love from India." Awesome. Hi, old man. Well, thank you so much, my friend, for joining in. Again, from all the way on the other side of the world, I really appreciate that. I wonder what time it is in India right now. Let me take a guess. I would say it's 7 p.m. or 1900 hours or whatever it might be. Buhert says, as an addition to the main theme, I recommend everyone read about what happened in Wolin, along with the whole history of Banderism, while keeping in mind that Bandera is considered hero in Ukraine. Kenisola says, I'm sorry if this is off topic, but is the Facebook group the only place to get feedback? Yes. Just in terms of Banderism, that is quite the hot topic. I don't know if I want to get into that right now. Maybe a little bit later on in the episode we can talk about that. Long story short, what you're talking about is how, Ukraine was invaded by the Nazis, and many people were forced to fight for the Nazis against the Soviets. And then when the Soviets invaded and took over and occupied Ukraine, that was one of the ways that they were able to they, and still to this day, I mean, that's, long story short, this is what Putin's whole objective is of Ukraine, is to, when he talks about getting rid of the fascists in Ukraine, he's still under this belief system that Ukraine is being run by fascists, right? And that's why he had to invade, to denazify Ukraine, even though Ukrainian's Prime Minister, President Zelensky, is Jewish, right? So pretty hard to be a Nazi while you're Jewish, but that certainly hasn't stopped Putin from coming up with this whole nonsensical reasoning for murdering millions of people. Okay, so let's move forward here. So what I want to do right now is I want to talk a little bit about the biography of today's artist and talk a little bit about why he's so important, particularly today, and why this artwork itself is, I think, a really beautiful artwork and important artwork, and how it fits into the greater oeuvre of Kurelek's biography. So, where should we start here? Again, quick shout out to the Facebook group. I always write a little biography and post that to the group before each episode. So if you want to get a little head start on learning about the artist, you can do that. Excuse me. Okay, so William Kurelek is born in 1927 and passes away at age 50 in 1977. And during his, I would say, fairly short life for an artist, because we've seen many artists live into their 80s and 90s, despite having had a relatively short career lasting like 30 or so years, he produced a lot of work, and the work, as we'll see here, is incredible in the level of detail and craftsmanship involved. So he was one of the most prolific artists, and I think one of the most interesting artists. The kind of art and the subject matter that he did varied really widely, and he continues to be, to this day, one of Canada's most beloved artists, and probably for a lot of people outside of Canada might be one of the only artists that from Canada that they know of, or maybe they didn't even realize he was Canadian to begin with, because of his popularity, particularly in England, during and after his lifetime. So William Kurelek is born in Whitford, Alberta. I'll just bring this up here. Whitford here is, was this, and still to this day, a tiny little town, a little village. We're zooming out here. Those of you familiar with Canadian geography would recognize Edmonton right here. If I just keep zooming out. Anyone who's a little bit familiar with my own art practice would see that this is Cold Lake, Alberta, and that's where a decade ago I got to fly in a CF-18 Hornet fighter jet plane and make art while traveling faster than the speed of sound. So I'm the first person to make landscape drawings while flying through the landscape past Mach 1. Anyway, so you can see Whitford here is basically halfway between Cold Lake and Edmonton, and if I just keep zooming out, we see here the province of Alberta, the province of Saskatchewan, and I'm right down here in Vancouver. I'll just zoom out a little bit further here so you have a bit of context for where we're talking about. So this is where he's originally from. His parents... Oops, let me plug my computer in here. His family originally comes from Ukraine and settled in Ukraine around the First World War. His mother was born in Canada. His father was originally from Ukraine. And we'll talk. One of the big themes in Kurelek's work is the experience of immigrants, because his family's story is so tied to immigration. He had a lot of empathy, sympathy, and understanding of the immigrant experience, and so obviously he focused on the experience of Ukrainian people because that's the culture he grew up in. But as we'll see, he became fascinated with the immigrant experience from people from all over the world coming to Canada. And he devoted books that he wrote and illustrated about different cultures and their experience arriving to Canada. And I think that's one of the I think great themes with William Kurelek is this profound empathy for his fellow people, his fellow men and women, and understanding the trials and difficulties that we all go through, some of which are we wear on our sleeves, and some of which are unspoken or stories that aren't necessarily passed down through the generations. And he felt kind of a responsibility to kind of bring some of those stories into light. And we'll also talk about why he decided to do that kind of thing, as opposed to talking maybe a bit more about his own experience as well. So, like a lot of Ukrainians who immigrated to Canada, they came to the center of Canada because a lot of immigrants, Ukrainian immigrants, were originally farmers in Ukraine. And so when they came to Canada, it's not like they're just going to all of a sudden become doctors and scientists. They're going to do the same thing that they were doing back home here in Canada. And the landscape in many places in Ukraine is very similar to much of the center of Canada, right? So it made that transition fairly straightforward. It didn't mean it was super easy, but if you can grow stuff in Ukraine, you can probably grow similar, like a lot of wheat, for instance, grown in Ukraine. They talk about Ukraine being the breadbasket for Europe, and same thing here in Canada. The majority of like wheat and mustard and things like that come in North America come from central Canada. However, during the Great Depression, shortly after William Kurelek is born, his family basically loses everything, and they move to a dairy farm and kind of switch professions, right? So his father goes from being like a farmer to being a dairy farmer, I guess. And they moved to Stonewall, Manitoba. So let's just see here. We'll go to Stonewall. Oops. Let's close this tab. So you'll notice this is kind of just north of Winnipeg here. So they make this kind of trip from over here back across towards Winnipeg. And anybody who's a little bit familiar with Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, these three central provinces in Canada, knows that there is a large population of Ukrainian immigrants settled in this area. Also, people from Poland and other Central European countries also settled in these same areas as well. But there's, quite sizable populations, though, around Winnipeg, Regina, Saskatoon, Edmonton, to a lesser extent, Calgary, Toronto, and places like that. But so the family moves just outside of Winnipeg, where they're raising cattle and making dairy. Eventually, and he wrote about those experiences as well in several books. I don't think I have those books here, though. No, I don't have those ones here. And that's another thing I want to come to, is his experience as both an artist and illustrator and author. You should also mention, so the area in and around Winnipeg that the family settled, it was considered to be this kind of like bogland, like kind of marshy, wet, semi, like throughout the year, it would get a lot of rain and be kind of swampy like. And so he writes about that in one of his books. I think it's the Prairie Boys Summer, Prairie Boys Winter, those two books, which were very, very popular, big hit books when he released them originally. Let me see, a few years later on, well, not a few years, like a decade later, when he eventually goes to high school, his father actually buys a house in Winnipeg and sends his children to live there. And then on the weekends, his parents would come and stay with them. And then during the weekdays, they would go back and work on the farm. And those kids would be expected to go to school, make themselves lunches. And so I find that's pretty fascinating. He grew up in a relatively large family, but just think about, like, it's just a different world, right? In these days, you'd be very unlikely that you would have a house full of like junior high and high school kids, brothers and sisters living in a house in a big city by themselves without their parents, right? That probably the authorities would be called, something like that. But back in the day, much less common. Kids were expected to grow up much faster. There's lots of books written about, the invention of childhood in the kind of early mid 20th century. Before that, again, especially if you're, from Eastern European family, like, kids are working on the farm. They're, if they go to school at all, right? So you're expected to work, and often families had really large families so that you could have a lot of free labor to work those farms. So let me just show you where where the family is sent to live here in Winnipeg. I don't know the exact address, but they settle. The house is somewhere here on Burroughs Avenue. I'll just zoom out here a little bit so you get a bit of context. For those of you who might be familiar, here's the Forks, which is the intersection of the Red River and the Assiniboine River. Very kind of historically important part of Canada, and also kind of plays a big role in the founding of Manitoba as a province. Louis Riel and the Red River settlement, right? That's a whole. We talked about that when we did our episode on Louis Riel. So not too far from the center of Winnipeg is where the Kurelek family lived, and this is the high school that he went to, Sir Isaac Newton High School, which is now, I guess, Isaac Newton School. So he would go there and take classes. And then he would go over here to this church, the St. Mary the Protectress Ukrainian Orthodox Church, where he took Ukrainian lessons here in the church. So that was also part of, many immigrant families made a priority of teaching their children the their home language, right? They often would speak that at home. It was really important for them to carry on the traditions of the family. And so I think still to this day, there's often that conflict with kind of immigrant parents and then their children who are born in Canada or United States or wherever it might be. The conflict between, like, wanting to preserve and follow those traditions, and then the kind of social pressure at school to kind of conform and, quote, be Canadian and assimilate, right? And your parents want you to wear certain kinds of more traditional clothing, and then you get to school and kids laugh and make fun of you for wearing those kinds of things, and so then you're pulled in different directions. And I think, again, especially kind of in Kurelek's youth, there's a lot of kind of internal conflict that plays a major role in his life. Okay, so growing up in Winnipeg, he eventually, when he graduates from high school, he studies at the University of Manitoba, where he takes a general arts course, which I think I don't think it was like a fine arts course. Is more along the lines of kind of like what would you, like general studies, like just a kind of a overall rounded education in a lot of different disciplines. I think his father, I think there was probably a pull towards wanting his son to kind of take over the family business, but then also kind of a hope and desire that maybe he would be able to excel and do something, that he would provide an opportunity for his children. Dimitro, the father, Dimitri Kurelek, William Kurelek's father, I think, either like take over the family business or become a doctor, a scientist, or a politician, find a good administrative government job kind of thing. That would be kind of the expectation. However, William Kurelek did kind of neither, and from kind of a relatively young age was interested in art, and he eventually goes to study art at the Ontario College of Art in Toronto, which is one of the 4 major art schools in Canada, that being OCAD in Toronto, NASCAD, Nova Scotia School of Art and Design in Halifax, the Alberta College of Art in Calgary, or now the University of the Arts of Alberta, which is where I originally went to school, although it was a different name, the Alberta College of Art, and then Emily Carr University of the Arts and Design in Vancouver, where I teach, right? So he went out to Toronto to study there. He convinced his father that he was going to become a graphic designer and work in the advertising business, because that was seen as a reliable kind of job that you could do that could pay well and become a good source of money for the family. Having said that, apparently he had little to no actual plan of pursuing a education in design and advertising. He always really intended ultimately to become an artist, but that was not really something that he felt confident or even thought would be. He knew that would cause a bit of a rift in the family, and I think it ultimately did. And so there is that part again. I think in Kurelek's biography, and this is not something I've read. Just I infer based on everything else I've read that there is this, like this kind of shadow life that Kurelek has. There's kind of themes of like shame and identity and family are all are kind of bubbling under the surface as he gets, into his college years. And one of the things he does is, when he was at school in Toronto, is he becomes like obsessed with the great Mexican muralist painters like Diego Rivera, Cisqueros, and Orozco, who at this sort of very same time in the kind of 30s and 40s were some of the most famous artists of their time. I mean, you have artists like Matisse and Picasso and stuff who are well known, but there is also this, the Mexican muralist painters have become globally famous, or touring around the world painting their murals, and in many ways are more popular with the general public than maybe Picasso or Matisse would have been, because they're painting on walls that often on city streets and government buildings, and are highly visible. And their work is also, at least for those three Mexican muralist painters, quite political as well. So if you're a young person and you're in art school, very easy to get involved in politics. Art schools tend to be kind of very lefty kind of places. And so the work of those, especially Diego Rivera, being very much involved in politics in Mexico and communism, socialism, etc., workers' rights, etc. So I think those were also things that were very appealing to this young man. So he decides that he's going to go down to Mexico, and he wants to study with these artists. He's heard, that they're there. Some of them are teaching, and maybe he can become a student of some of these very famous artists. So he packs up and moves down to Mexico. And so let's just take a quick look. He moves to San Miguel. And I couldn't quite find the exact name. I think the institution's name has changed. I don't know if it's this Centro Bellas Artes or the Instituto Allende Escuela de Arte Español. Forgive my pronunciations here. Let's just, I'll just zoom out here. So you can see this is kind of in the, the Mexico City vicinity. Where's that? Okay, and there's the U.S. border up there, right? So I think, though, however, I have to just quickly remind myself, I think he moves down there and he to study there, but then he realizes that, I think it was Cisqueros had left. Something like that, like he moved. I don't know if it mentions any of that here, but he flies all the way down there to go to school down there, and realizes, like, the month before, one of those muralist painters who was a teacher at the school had moved on and had either started a project elsewhere or had quit his position and left. So I think that was also a little bit of like, oh my goodness, I'm kind of now in a foreign country and my plans have kind of fallen through. So that kind of, again, put him in a little bit of feeling a bit kind of lost and kind of an alien to his current circumstance. And so throughout this time, he's been kind of suffering mentally, emotionally, we're not even, I think, to this day exactly sure what ailed him throughout his life. I guess he was treated at some point for schizophrenia. He also claimed to have some vision problems, that he was kind of having these hallucinations. seeing colors. Some people have said that maybe that's migraine related. But either way, he moves to England in, I think, 1951, 52, and because he read about this hospital in London called the Maudley Psychiatric Hospital, that was supposed to be like the leading place in the world to treat some of these issues that he was going through. So this is, we often think of people being kind of like arrested and thrown in sort of these hospitals, insane asylums, but there was also lots of hospitals where people would self-enroll to go to those kinds of places because they're like, something is wrong with my head and with my thinking, and I want to solve this problem. I want these voices to go away. I want these visions to go away. Help me, right? So he goes out there. He undergoes like shock therapy, like electroshock therapy. These kinds of, where they put those electrodes on your temples and they crank up the power, right? Like things that we now consider to be kind of barbaric and like inhumane. He voluntarily subjected himself to those kinds of treatments because he was so desperate for some kind of relief, which just goes to show kind of the amount of pain and suffering that he was going through, right? You don't allow that kind of stuff to happen to yourself unless you're like at your final straw. Like you're like, I can't live with this anymore. Help me. I'm willing to undergo whatever possible treatment exists out there to help this go away. So while we're here, let's first start taking a look at some of his work. So here's that Ukrainian church where he took Ukrainian lessons in. It was actually one of the priests in here who was really the main force to encourage him to pursue art, which is maybe not. I don't know. Maybe I'm just biased, but that wouldn't be the first person that would come to my mind as someone encouraging someone to pursue art would be the local priest. But good on him for encouraging William Kurelek to really, because I'm sure they had lots of conversations. Like, my dad is not really in favor of doing this, and the priest being like, maybe you've got a gift. Maybe this is, and so I'm sure that William Kurelek's own father was probably not pleased that the church was the one that was kind of pushing him to go in that direction. It's interesting here. So here's Ciscaros' one of his big paintings here, and here's a Hieronymus Bosch, a detail of Hieronymus Bosch painting. It's interesting, that they bring these up because you'll see later on many of Kurelek's paintings have just an extreme amount of detail in them. So, which is, the trademark of Hieronymus Bosch, right? Just like tons and tons of little figures. This is kind of interesting. Here's the photograph of him in 1949 in Toronto when he was a student at the Ontario College of Art, carrying his portfolio under his arm like that. Here's where he stayed when he was in Mexico City. There's the courtyard behind his house. Okay, so he goes to England, and while he's in the hospital, he creates a couple of his most powerful works, maybe of all time, but particularly of his youth. I'm just trying to, okay, here, let's bring this one up. This is arguably his most famous painting, The Maze from 1953, which is has been made into a documentary, and this painting, which Bethlehem Museum of the Mind, I feel like I've seen this painting though at the Tate in London. I know this is, you know, again, for some people outside of Canada, this might be one of the most famous paintings made by a Canadian artist. Maybe less so here in Canada because it's not in a Canadian collection, but this painting is a painting that kind of he was encouraged to create as almost kind of part of his therapeutic process. You know, to the credit of the hospital where he was at, they were early advocates of art therapy and encouraged Kurelek to paint the thoughts and feelings that he was having in order to kind of externalize them, visualize them, and in that way maybe to take a little bit of control back over top of all of these fears and anxieties that were tormenting him. This is definitely a bizarre, weird painting. It's kind of hard to see, understand exactly what's happening here, but let's see if I can point out what we see here. So you're seeing the inside of his head. And his head has basically been cut in half. And so here's where his eyeballs are supposed to go. And then here's the other side to his head on the far right. So his head has sort of been split open and he's laying down on this dirt. And if we look through kind of where his eye sockets are, you can see his hands here and then his feet through his kind of opening of his mouth. Very weird, like, yeah, and then we see all these sort of like little images, kind of memories and thoughts and fears, stories, all in these little vignettes all over the place here. Many of which are pretty dark and disturbing types of images of, like, you know, people in operating rooms being, you know, operated, dissected, people on these, like, you know, this kind of image here, which is kind of hard to see, you know, of a person on a, what do you call it, like an assembly, like this kind of reminds me, a lot of these images remind me of, like, Pink Floyd's The Wall, like these, you know, really dark, pretty disturbing types of things, right? And so this is all of what's going on in his head. And so originally the doctor's like, yeah, William, like, we love that you're into art. Let's paint some of the things that you're feeling. And if you're having a hard time, you know, writing them down or talking about them, make some paintings. And then he makes paintings like this, and they're like, whoa, okay, that's kind of wild. And so he makes another one of these paintings. This one, what is this called? I Spit on Life, right? And here you've got the death here, who's like overseeing this man who's hung himself here, you know, in this, you know, like, all, like, it's just so dark, all this imagery, this guy beating this horse with a, you know, a pitchfork in the back of the horse, this guy shooting intravenous drugs here, like, oh my goodness, like these caged animals, and it's just so. After this point, the doctors are like, well, remember how we said you should paint some of the feelings and fears and things you have? Maybe let's stop going inside and let's try to paint the stuff outside. Maybe that's we should probably focus on that, because what's coming out is kind of a little bit disturbing, right? And maybe we shouldn't be focusing on some of those darker visions that you have. And so one of the things that also happens at this time is he converts to Roman Catholicism, and starts kind of making art that is kind of explicitly impersonal, so that is not about his interior life, but about the world around him, about other people, maybe about, again, eventually into the immigrant experience, and maybe a little bit about his childhood, but trying to kind of find more universal themes as a way of kind of focusing his attention on something maybe a little bit more positive. So, one of these images that he does here is he starts painting these like trompe-l'oeil optical illusion kind of paintings. He did a bunch of these, which are just like, take a look at this painting like of a dollar bill on a piece of wood with a key and the string and a stamp and a burnt match and a clipping from a newspaper, a coin. Like, can you just imagine if we tried to do a painting like this for this class, right? This would take a couple of sessions at least, and never mind the detail in this dollar bill. So you could see from a craftsmanship level, he is, I would say William Kurelek was one of the most technically proficient artists of the last 100 years. And I'd almost say, I would probably say that the most technically proficient Canadian artist of all time, and it was almost indisputable. So this type of work that we're seeing that he's capable of and that he ultimately does is also distinctly out of vogue during the time that he's working. In the 1940s, 1950s, the most popular kinds of art that are being produced is abstract painting, abstract sculpture. So we're talking paintings by like Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, Robert Motherwell, Willem de Kooning. Those are the kind of the most famous artists of this period of time. It's not until kind of late 50s, early 60s that pop art starts to happen. But even this, not really pop art either, right? This is more along the lines of what artists like Hieronymus Bosch and a lot of like the great Dutch painters of the 1600s were painting. So he's sort of like a blast from art history past. So he is totally like a man out of his time, and that becomes pretty much the way that he's kind of seen throughout the majority of his career, as a guy who is definitely not following the trends, the fashion of the time, who's doing something that basically nobody else is doing, pursuing his own path. And so for some people, they see William Kurelek as a hero in that sense of like, this guy who is just determined to do his own thing, could care less about what's popular or what the art intelligentsia is interested in, and is just going to just do what brings him joy and happiness, and to a certain extent gives him a reprieve from the mental anguish that he was suffering throughout most of his life. On the other hand, there are people that look at William Kurelek's work back then, and even still to this day, as sort of like just a complete relic a fossil, a dinosaur that is completely irrelevant to modern art, and kind of like and made him kind of easy to dismiss as like, this guy he's not doing anything new, he's not breaking any new ground, he's super retrograde as opposed to avant-garde, right? The avant-garde being, in military terms, the tip of the spear, the people at the very front of the front lines of a war, right? That's where that term comes from, the avant-garde, as opposed to the retrograde, the people at the very, very end of the snake, in terms of like a military metaphor, right? The tail, right? He's so far behind the times, he's totally irrelevant, not even worthy of being included in discussion as to what's going on in terms of art, and especially art in Canada. However, one of the great ironies, right, like look at this other painting here, the Lord, that like this guy, this blind man on this pathway, right, just like reaching out for help, right? This is talking about his like conversion to Roman Catholicism, of a man yearning to see and to be led out of the darkness that he was feeling. Okay, there's just so much here. I want to try to I mean, all of these are just so beautiful, the amount of detail. Okay, so the great irony is that in the early 60s, the head of the museum, I think it was the Museum of Modern Art, let me just make sure I get this story, because this is quite a significant moment in his life. Yeah, Alfred Barr of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City comes to Canada, and basically, he, with this idea that he's going to find one artwork by one Canadian artist to add to the Museum of Modern Art's collection. And so every artist and gallery is scrambling to, because I think it was Alfred H. Barr, was the kingmaker of modern art, right? Like if he could, if he gave your art the stamp of approval, boom, you are made the rest of your life. It's like winning an Olympic gold medal or something. And so he comes to Canada, and all of these abstract painters are like, showing him their work. And of all the work in all of Canada that Barr selects as what he thinks is the most important Canadian artist of his time is William Kurelek. And he buys this painting, Hailstorm in Alberta, from 1961 for the Museum of Modern Art collection, which for Canadian art was just about the most confounding thing that anybody in the art world in Canada could possibly have imagined. Like I'm sure all of these famous Canadian artists and institutions were just baffled. Like they're like, has this guy lost his mind? They think William Kurelek, of all people, the guy that is the most backwards, retrograde artist in maybe working today, whose work has absolutely nothing to do with all of the major trends in modern art going on in Europe and North America. This William Kurelek, that's the guy that the director of the Museum of Modern Art thinks is the most important artist and worthy of being a member of the collection, right? Like it threw the Canadian art psyche into complete distress. Like I can't even like think of what a like what would be an analogy to that. Like like it would be like a great, like the head of Penguin Publishing or something, looking for the next great novelist, and you know, all of these great authors are scrambling to win favor with the president of Penguin, and he chooses Dr. Seuss as his as the great American author. Like, people are like, what on, like, how, is this guy insane? What was he thinking, right? So anyway, you know, and just me describing it right now, I don't even think really quite conveys the level of identity crisis that created in Canada. Because, you know, here's all these people trying to curry favor with this really important director of the most important art museum, modern art museum of the time, and maybe still to this day. And he chose what most people thought was sort of the, like, pretty much the absolute last person that could ever have been chosen, right? And maybe that's one of the reasons why he did that, was just to kind of give Canadian art like a major shakeup. Because obviously, as soon as that happened, all of a sudden, all of these people who thought they were the ones who were determining the taste of Canada are all of a sudden have to scramble and yes, I also thought William Kurelek is a great Canadian artist, and yeah, I forgot to mention we're going to have a big exhibition of his work at the National Gallery next month. Yes, we haven't put it on our website, but that's you know, it's like, all these people just lost their minds. So I just think that's hilarious. Oh, I forgot to mention, so while he was in England and while he was undergoing therapy there, and after he converted to Roman Catholicism, he began working as a picture framer for F.A. Pollock. He works there for a couple of years. And this guy was basically like the framer for the Tate in England, the Louvre in Paris. So we're talking about like one of the greatest picture framers in Europe at the time. And so William Kurelek finds himself a job as like an apprentice working in this guy's shop, and learns all these really incredible, valuable skills, so that later on, when he moves back to Canada, he moves back to Toronto, I think in, 1959, he gets a job working at the Isaacs Gallery. Avram Isaacs was, at the time, kind of running Canada's arguably one of its most important art galleries, private art galleries. And so he there's this youngish guy in his early 30s that moves to Toronto, who's got like now impeccable credentials as having, you know, made frames that are on display inside the Louvre Museum. So it's like, you know, this guy's got impeccable qualifications. He hires him to work in his gallery. Obviously, very quickly to realize that this guy is also an extremely talented artist. So provides him kind of a studio space in the back of his gallery to make his own artwork, and also starts exhibiting his artwork in his gallery. And of course, so this is right before Alfred Barr comes from New York to Toronto and selects William Kurelek as the great Canadian artist of his time for the collection. But to his credit, Avram Isaacs was very critical in elevating Kurelek to the stage that Alfred Barr could even find his work, right? Because Kurelek starts exhibiting his work in this gallery, which at the time was known for its very progressive art exhibitions. And so even those artists that were exhibiting at Avram Isaacs' gallery were kind of like, I don't know, dude, like, I love all the artists you're exhibiting, you got like great art month to month to month, and then once a year you're exhibiting the framer's artwork, this guy who makes work like these illustrations that, like, come on, dude, like. But those works that William Kurelek were making were extremely popular, and almost immediately his exhibitions were selling out. So Avram Isaac was smart enough, he's like, dude, like, this guy is just easy money, right? I mean, he might not be very popular with the critics, the newspapers detest him, but we've got lineups going out the door, the general public can't wait to come inside. And I can't keep his art in stock. The minute he finishes a painting, it's sold, right? So it's, from business perspective, Avram Isaac is like, this is a no-brainer. This guy's just making me money hand over fist. So that relationship lasts. I mean, I think William Kurelek kept working in Avram Isaac's gallery for years and years, even after his work became very successful and he was selling a lot of his work. What else do I want to say? Because oh my goodness, I gotta move on here. Okay. What else? What do I want to say? So, William Kurelek, the themes that he explores in his work are super diverse. So you have, and like, I found this essay here talking about, like, no Canadian painter has been so simultaneously praised and reviled. Reviled? What a strong word. And, like, one expects to read about, like, some terrible kind of Me Too controversy that Kurelek is involved in. This guy who's done some horrifically horrible, socially repulsive thing. And yet it's just, this guy makes paintings of kind of everyday life in and around Toronto and in the prairies. That's what caused him to be reviled by some people during his lifetime. So this guy who is super popular with the public, but absolutely detested by the intelligentsia. He starts writing and publishing these books based on his, to some extent, his childhood. But again, he's trying to kind of toe that line of talking about his childhood, but keeping some distance and kind of talking about more universal experiences by Ukrainian immigrants in Canada. Eventually writes a book about the Jewish experience in Canada. There's a couple other ones I can't remember. Oh, another big theme as well is his fixation on nuclear war. I think part of William Kurelek has these visions of nuclear annihilation, And so there's kind of this theme undercurrent in a lot of his work, especially kind of from the, you know, late 50s onward, of nuclear war, the apocalypse. That's partly also why he falls so deeply into religion. He starts making art that is like overtly religious. He often works in these like projects where he does a book based on the like, you know, I've got a bunch of them here, like this is something that I have a great deal of appreciation of him for. Excuse me. Is I mean, I think of William Kurelek is this guy that kind of, he's hard to pin down because he's both like a so-called fine artist who exhibits his artwork in art galleries and museums. There's also kind of almost like a comic book artist, illustrator, storyteller who's writing and publishing his own books. This is actually probably not the best example of that. Here's one of them. I talked about the Prairie Boys Summer, Prairie Boys Winter. This book is about his experience working as a lumberjack. He did this a couple of years in a row. And I guess one thing I really appreciate about this is I've been working on similar things for the past decade or so. And I've met with publishers. I mean, I have a publisher right now. But often what I would hear from people is like, this is kind of, you know, the kind of stuff you're talking about doing it's not a novel, and it's not a comic book. It's kind of this picture book, but it's for adults. Like, what's the market for this? Like, no one is really interested in this kind of stuff. And it wasn't until actually over Christmas when I was visiting my family that I stumbled upon William Kurelek's illustrations, a book that he illustrated of W.O. Mitchell's, which is the... W.O. Mitchell, Who Has Seen the Wind? W.O. Mitchell being one of Canada's greatest authors of all time. And so William Kurelek illustrated a number of books, but he did Who Has Seen the Wind by W.O. Mitchell. And really beautiful illustrations. I'm like, oh my goodness. And I remember looking at that book and reading that book as a kid, and a kind of bit of a brainwave, and just thinking like, oh, here's another Canadian artist who's doing what I want to do. Like, the very thing that people have said is, it just can't work. It is very reassuring to me to realize, oh, well, here's this guy that was doing what I want to do, and he was one of the most successful artists in Canadian history. Okay, so I'm not crazy, and there is a way to make this happen, for me to do what I want to do. And so probably in the very back of my mind, I had W.O. Mitchell's Who Has Seen the Wind, illustrated by Kurelek, deep back inside my head somewhere, and just completely forgot about it for 35 plus years. So stumbling back on his work again over the past like 6 months for me has been kind of like, oh man, okay, I'm not totally out of my mind alone trying to reinvent the wheel. There's an incredible precedent for what I want to do, and which I'm super grateful for, and you know, gives me a great deal of respect for him, because if people were telling me that what I want to do, this kind of thing, is basically impossible. Just imagine 50, 60, 70 years ago, somebody trying to do that. People would, the amount of resistance he would have faced would have been even more intense. Anyway, I find, you know, he's got an image here and then a page of kind of text recollections of his experience working as a lumberjack. And this is just, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do. And so that just makes me feel not nearly as crazy and alone as, you know, sometimes when you're working on a project. Let me see. So this book here, The Ukrainian Pioneer, it's not really a book that he wrote per se, I don't think. But sort of documents this series of 6 panels that he did. I believe this is... Where is this now? I don't know if it's in the Niagara Falls anymore. I'm trying to remember where this art is exhibited. But this kind of series of 6 big paintings that were hung side by side that talk about the story of Ukrainian immigration to Canada, which obviously, being of Ukrainian descent myself, hits home. And then obviously, considering everything going on in the world today, is, I think, particularly timely, considering Vladimir Putin is on a determined to eradicate Ukrainian culture because he doesn't believe Ukraine or Ukrainians even technically exist. He thinks it's all an invention by Lenin. Which is pretty funny, that since Ukraine existed like 1,000 years before Russia, but you know, it's certainly not going to stop a delusional dictator, mass murderer from believing what he wants to believe. William Kurelek also went on at least, I think, 2 visits to Ukraine to kind of learn about his family's history. And literally one of the very last things that he did before he passed away at age 50 was to go back to Ukraine. And it goes to show that he was in very poor health at this time. But even despite that, he wrote, like, this is basically all of his journal entries that he wrote while he was there. And, you know, his family is also from Western Ukraine, at some point was part of Poland, very close to where, so my family is from in and around this area, near Lvov. And so that also is like, wow, like, you know, his story, his family story is very similar to my father's side of the family story. And my grandfather and my uncle, around this same time in the late 70s, also went to Ukraine to go and try to find information about our family, only to discover that the Soviets had basically completely obliterated our ancestral village. So literally absolutely nothing exists of our family's history there, which is not uncommon. That was the way that the Russians kind of ran things, is that they would basically, you know, with these sort of collectivization of farms, they would move everyone from their little tiny farms to the kind of 1 or 2 really big farms, obliterate all of those little villages. Anybody who put up any sort of argument against it was sent to Siberia or just executed on the spot. And then all sorts of, hundreds and thousands of people from Russia were sent to live amongst Ukrainians in order to kind of dilute the culture and the language, ultimately doing their very best to eradicate Ukrainian culture. So this, basically everything we're seeing here, all these drawings that he made, this is only like a couple of months while he was away, and he just created tons of work, all these paintings and sketches and photographs. All of these are photographs that he took of that. So I definitely have to move on here. There's just so much I could talk about because it's also deeply important and personal to myself. But how do I wrap up? Okay, let's So just before I move on, I just want to quickly talk about today's painting in particular and why I think Kurelek is so important and why today's artwork I think is of particular value here. Oh, awesome. Barbara says some of Kurelek's books are available here in the UK, ranging from £50 to £10 for secondhand. I'm adding them to my Christmas list. Awesome. CMD says, loving this theme, Ukraine history is a little sad. Yes, definitely. Very tragic. And I think that, one of the I don't know if it's if it's a good thing or a bad thing to recognize, but what's going on in Ukraine right now is sadly nothing new. That Ukraine has been invaded and occupied for thousands of years by pretty much every single culture nearby has at some point taken over Ukraine, because Ukraine is just basically a giant flat land with very little kind of natural barriers like mountains or rivers and things that can kind of isolate or protect people. So anytime, whether it was Russians or Vikings or Persians or the Poles, Turkish invader, everybody has taken a bite out of Ukraine over the past couple thousand years, which is upsetting, but it also I think makes Ukraine a very, very rich country culturally, because of all of these different groups of people who have been in and around that area of the world for so long. It's not like a monoculture. It's super, super diverse. Especially genetically, right? Okay, so let's just take a quick look at today's painting. So this is the original artwork, and here we have a mother who is teaching her son about how to speak and read Ukrainian. And so this would have been part of, this might be a little vignette into Kurelek's own life and his childhood. Again, growing up on a farm in rural Alberta and later Manitoba, probably living in villages where almost everybody else was Ukrainian, at least at first. Knowing probably Ukrainian, I would imagine, was probably William Kurelek's first language growing up. And so I love this artwork because it talks about sort of like families passing on important histories and traditions and culture. And I think particularly at a time where Ukraine and Ukrainian culture and identity are very much threatened once again. This idea of passing that knowledge on to future generations is very, very important. So from that point of view, I feel like this painting kind of is very, very timely, right? And it was actually, I've been thinking about doing a William Kurelek painting. I was originally going to do something focusing on Who Has Seen the Wind by W.O. Mitchell, as I mentioned earlier. But actually a couple of people of Ukrainian descent who found my channel suggested William Kurelek, and so it made me think more than just focusing on William Kurelek as a great Canadian artist, but also his importance and relevance in terms of Ukrainian identity. And so that's why I decided to really focus on this particular painting. As I said, I used Photoshop to expand the painting from that oval shape into the square. And then I also kind of changed the colors to more closely reflect the Ukrainian flag, and then replaced the image in the top corner with the Ukrainian trident. Ukrainian trident is one of the oldest symbols of Ukrainian culture and identity. And this goes back to coins that were found in Ukraine that are 1,000 years before the founding of Moscow and Russia itself. So kind of while she's teaching this boy about Ukrainian language, there's this kind of enduring symbol of Ukrainian identity. So having said all of that, depending on how you might want to do this painting, you may want to change it. It wouldn't offend me in the least if you decided you wanted to put a poster of Taylor Swift in the corner and change the woman's clothing and her hair and bonnet and all this thing into something else entirely. And if you wanted to change the boy's clothing or turn him into a her, have them reading Batman comics or whatever it might be, that's to me totally fine. I think, however you are inspired by the work of William Kurelek, I think he would be very honored by that as well. I think the fact that anybody is talking about his work and sharing his work and finding inspiration from it, I think would make him feel like his life had meaning and value, and that all of the pain and suffering that he went throughout his life was worth it, that he accomplished something important and meaningful, and I think he would be very appreciative of that. So I want to put that out there. However you want to paint today's painting, if you do decide you want to reinterpret it, then you should feel encouraged to do so. Barbara's signing off for a cup of tea. Awesome. So let's get down to business here. I think, how long did I talk for? Probably 2 hours there, right? Gosh. Remember I said I was going to be brief, right? So 2 hours, that's brief, right? Brief conversation. Next, what I want to do is I want to do a little bit of underpainting. And the reason I want to do a little bit of underpainting is that I want to be able to preserve some details here that I might be afraid could get covered up under subsequent layers of paint. Now, I myself have used different definitions of this term underpainting in the past on this channel. There's, because there's different ideas of what constitutes an underpainting. The way that I typically think of it today, or at least for the purposes of these episodes, is essentially kind of painting in like placeholders for details that I might be afraid could get covered up with other layers of paint. But I would say that's probably not the way most people think of underpainting. A lot of people, when they think of underpainting, is just kind of blocking in shapes and then going into details over top of the underpainting. Some artists would even consider, you know, blending the underdrawing or the image transfer process we did here earlier into the underpainting. And especially kind of more confident painters might literally just start painting the image, you know, from scratch without doing any drawing and consider that to be an underpainting. So I think it's just worth just putting that out there, that there's that this is a term that is not in dispute, but just has many different definitions or uses by different people depending on the kind of art they make. So, oh, there's Trap Gaming there in the chat too. Okay, I'm gonna move forward, otherwise I'm gonna start reading comments and we'll be here forever. Gosh, I still have this terrible cough that I had over the past few weeks. In fact, I would say I'm kind of not feeling super great at the moment, kind of getting that little bit of a hot sweat going on here. So I'm actually going to turn a fan on. Whew. Okay. So I'm going to mix a black color here. So I'm taking my cool yellow, cool blue, that's a lot of blue, but, and warm red. Let's mix all these together. So definitely more on the blue side of things. Look how green that is. Whew. It's like as soon as I stop talking, I start feeling a little bit queasy. Well, if I have to stop, I'll stop, but this is kind of why I was ultimately, or what I was hoping to do today was maybe start with a shorter episode to get back into things in case I also did start to not feel quite as good. So I've mixed up a black here. Oh, there's Chase. She says, hey, it's been a while. I wanted to let you know that today was my last day of high school. Awesome. Cool, Chase. Congratulations on graduating. Onward and upward. That's so cool. Congratulations. Okay, so I got some black mixed here. You know, I gotta say, now that I've got this Imprimatura here, there is part of me that wonders I could just keep this face largely unchanged. So I'm just now debating a little bit of, do I need to do what I'm about to do? I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some glazing fluid to this, and so rather than painting super dark solid, I'm going to dilute this with some glazing fluid. It's going to make this color more transparent, maybe a little bit more fluid and easier to paint with. So the benefit of using that glazing fluid is it's made the paint a little bit more transparent, so it's not as dark. So that means I can layer it over and over and over if I want to get it darker. It also means that because it's a little more fluid, it's a little bit easier to paint with. And also because the glazing fluid has a chemical that slows the drying time down, it means if I'm really unhappy with things, I can wipe that paint away, after even a couple of minutes. Gives me that extra little bit of an opportunity to change my mind if I'm unhappy. Now, I didn't need to clean that up because I'm going to paint that background gray anyway, but I just wanted to kind of show that because this has that chemical that slows the drying time down, I can really go as slow as I want and not have to worry about, like, making mistakes and then having to kind of live with my mistakes. I can erase them very easily. Okay, hold on. I'm starting to kind of go all over here. Maybe I'm not going to do all of those details. One little thing, about painting hands is I find, like, when you're painting or drawing female hands as opposed to more masculine hands, you tend to want, like, the fingers to be, especially, a little bit more pointy. As opposed to, like, more masculine hands, you kind of want them to be blocky and square. And again, those are conventions of art that are certainly open to being reevaluated and changed and stuff. But if you're working on this painting and you're like, how come the body just looks so masculine? I want her to look like a mom and not an old man. Just think about trying to keep the kind of like the tips of the fingers kind of pointy. That makes them kind of look like fingernails. So what's strange about this kid's face here? If we look at the original, your guess is as good as mine as to where the eyes are. Like, we'll bring these up side by side. Right, like, is the eye here or right there? I mean, we could just, I mean, it's almost like it's kind of hidden by the hair. I'll leave that for right now. I might even, in a moment here, just take a look at William Kurelek's art and see if I can just see how he would have there's lots of illustrations he did of like little boys playing, and see if we can find that detail there. Now this hand is going to probably mostly disappear into shadows. But it's still, I always find it helpful to paint these things in anyway, even if they're going to get covered up. Stephanie says, could you use a super fine acrylic paint pen for the details in the underpainting, or would that be lazy? No, you could totally do that. Absolutely. The one thing, and I don't know, maybe this is just what I seem to notice, is like acrylic paint pens, and one of the reasons why I don't do what I think you're suggesting is I find them like if I've done that kind of thing, if I've drawn with them and then paint over top, that they kind of get reactivated, and the paint smudges, like even after the paint's sort of been so-called dry for a few hours, all of a sudden I start painting over top of the dry Posca pen, and the paint comes alive and smudges. I'm like, ah! So it's worth, if you do something like that, just to test it, so that you don't have that surprise. I can't remember. I found that in one or two of the episodes I did, and I can't remember which ones they were. But ever since then, I've been a little bit reticent, like, oh man, I don't want to chance it. So, but maybe different people have different results. Maybe it was just the pen I had, the chemistry of it was off or something. I don't know. Okay. I think that's good for right now. Actually, maybe I'm just going to quickly blow dry this to help set it in place. Man, I hope I'm not still sick. Oof. I tell you, last week was probably some of the most sick I've been in a long time. Do not wish that on my worst enemy. Also, I just want to say, Stephanie, as well, that I would not worry whatsoever about what anybody else thinks or says is right or wrong when it comes to making art, or more specifically painting in this case, right? That just because, like, so many people have such weird hang-ups when it comes to art. They see something and like, oh, that's cheating, or that's lazy, or whatever. You know, I think however you get a painting done, and if it gets done in a way that makes you happy and, you know, makes you feel like you've achieved something that you might not have otherwise been able to do, that's a win. And if somebody says that that's cheating, or that's wrong, or you can't do that, you're not supposed to do that, whatever, right? You can't make everybody happy. There's always somebody out there who has some crazy idea of what should or shouldn't be done. And I mean, artists have always had disagreements. And artists, you know, whenever I hear people talking about, like, is this art or is that art? You know, and like, ever since I've started art school, you know, you go somewhere and someone's like, you're an artist, what do you think about this? I'm like, I don't know, I'm not really a big fan of it. Nobody disagrees more about what art is, or how to make an artwork, than artists themselves. You'll never find consensus as to, like, this is the right or wrong way to do that, especially over the past 100 years of art history. There's the diversity of viewpoints has never been more broad than it is today. But even back in the day, like, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo disagreed about how to make a painting, right? Two great artists, but they both thought the other was just insane. They're like, I can't, you know. So yeah, and there's always going to be somebody who's, no, you can't do that. Singa says, can you use a watercolor pen? Watercolor pen. I'm not even sure exactly what that is. Watercolor pen. I mean, I'm assuming obviously that they exist since you mentioned it. I guess it's a pen that contains watercolor or something, pigments in it. I don't know. The main thing is, if you're going to use a pen like that in acrylic paint, you just want to maybe, and if you're going to use it for underdrawing or underpainting, that it can that you can proceed without that paint smudging or smearing. So just do, you know, it's like when you're washing clothes and they say test on a, you know, the inside of the fabric, so you're not testing right on in the middle of your shirt and like, I just bleached it. What have I done? You're testing on, you know, the inside flap or something. You're like, oh, that's, yeah, definitely not going to do that, right? So okay. So now that I've got a few lines down for my underdrawing, I want to go in and start painting the background, and then ultimately the foreground shapes, and then we'll start going into the details. So the first thing I want to do is I want to paint this sort of grayish blue background on the wall in behind the teacher and the student, or the mother and son. So what we've got there is kind of like a grayish blue, grayish cool blue. So to do that, Well, might be a little bit too much, but let's see. I'm going to take this maybe. Yeah, it might be a bit too much. Okay, so I'm going to. Oops. So I'm going to take my cool blue like this. Let's scoop up some black. Mix this together here. See, I was chatting for so long that the paint's kind of dried up a bit here on my palette. Okay, let's look at these colors side by side here. So that's pretty close. I think it just needs to be a little bit lighter. It's definitely a bit too much blue in there, but that's okay. So I think I just want it to be a bit more on the gray side, so I'm just adding more black and white. And even that's still a little bit more on the blue side than I want. But I think that's okay. I mean, it's got kind of a nice grayish quality here. I am gonna add a bit more. I'm gonna add a little bit of matte. Might have been a bit too much. Let's mix it in here. It's gonna make the color a little bit more transparent. Okay. Probably gonna have to do 2 coats of this because I put, I think, too much matte medium in here, made it too transparent. there's this little piece of paper or something hanging off there. I'm just going to paint over it, and I can paint that back later on. Okay, so I'm going to blow dry that, and I'm going to do another layer because I just put too much matte medium in there. Made it too transparent. So where's my blow dryer? Nullified Malamute says, when I first started visual arts long ago, I wanted beautiful stuff like this and not the history of tribal art and whatever. Anyways, hello. Not exactly. I guess, are you talking about like more so-called realistic art as opposed to abstract art, or? But I do think, it's always worth just keeping in mind that each one of us has different ideas of what constitutes so-called good art and beautiful art. And that's part of what I've been trying to do, is to showcase as many different artists whose styles vary quite wildly, in hopes that people can find the style or styles that they like the most, that they might want to try to replicate more than others, without any kind of judgments as to one being better than the other. As the saying goes, one person's trash is another one's treasure. And sometimes, like, our ideas of what a good or bad art is based on other people's opinions and not really authentically our own. And also sometimes the style of art, you might like a style of art more than another. Like, you might like this style a lot, But you might find painting in this style to be really difficult and might cause you to not want to paint at all. And it, like, an example I always give is like Walt Disney. You know, some people might say, well, Walt Disney is a great artist. Look at how incredible his innovations were, how he made us fall in love with a mouse, the thing that might usually scare people half to death if they saw it running around on their kitchen. And then there's other people who might say Walt Disney was one of the worst artists ever. Like, look how terrible his painting of a mouse is. It doesn't look anything like any mouse I've ever seen. So clearly he's a terrible artist. Okay, I think that's definitely darker than the original for sure. That's okay, because I can darken and lighten up different parts of this. So I'm adding a bunch of white to this same color with a little bit of glazing fluid to make it a bit more transparent. Because while I'm here, I'm just going to paint in the vase. You know, maybe while I've got that kind of color mixed up here, I'm just going to take it and use it to paint this top corner. Now, having just done that, I think I've pretty much completely covered up the trident that was there. It's okay. We'll find it and bring it back. Lots of ways to do that. So it's not even, but that's okay because I'm going to do a second coat just like I did with the background. gonna blow dry this here. Nullified Malamute says, well, just like this drawing and painting you did there, similar things like this is like hard, probably because my brain thinks of this as a very complicated, so I would do these abstract and stuff. Basically to get myself comfortable, since these pieces of art, like the random splatters and stuff. Anyways, gotta leave right now. Cheerio. Awesome. Thanks for stopping in and saying hello. Very cool to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. Okay, I'm gonna do another layer of this color. Maybe add a little bit more white here. I'm going to use the same color. Here. Okay, so I'm just trying to decide what my plan is next. Do I want to go to the foreground and start painting the figures? Or do I want to deal with the shadow and the highlight on the wall next? I think I'm going to blow dry this and see. think I'm going to try doing the kind of lightening this area up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my glazing fluid, really get that on my brush. Look, see how there's that color coming out of inside the brush? It means I didn't clean the brush quite thoroughly enough. It's okay. And then I'm gonna get some color on there. I take a soft brush and try to buff out those edges. Too transparent and not enough glazing fluid. So I'm going to blow dry that. I'm going to do it again. Okay, let's do a little bit more. I'm going to move towards the center. Or towards the lamp, I guess, I mean. Chase says, "Hey Mike, I'm thinking of painting the four boys and the town from South Park and the other South Park sign for fun. Also, have you ever seen it?" Yeah, of course I've seen South Park. Yeah, of course. That sounds like a great idea. I'd love to see your version of that. Okay, so one thing is I'm not happy with kind of how this edge is. It dried a little bit too fast for me and a little uneven. So I'm going to go back in the opposite direction. I'm going to take my glazing fluid and some of that color, and I'm going to go in reverse here. So I'm going to take this color, which should match the background. I'm just going to go back over this edge a bit. Right, and then feels better. I don't know if it's perfect. That's better, at least. Do I want to... Maybe I'll just do a tiny bit more there. You've been watching South Park since you were 5. Oh my goodness. I don't know if necessarily some of the stuff going on in South Park is totally appropriate for 5-year-olds. Okay. Oof. I keep getting these sort of like waves of nausea. Oh. To the point, you know, it's like one of those things I feel totally fine. I'm like, whoa, hot flash. I think I gotta Might have to run to the bathroom to let something explode out of my body. So we'll see how much longer I can last here. I mean, I'd love to do it all in one go, but that may or may not be possible. We'll have to see here. I'm just going to blow dry that again. Okay. I'm just debating, do I want to try doing the shadow now? I mean, ideally, I would have this painted, put the shadow over top of it. It's very sweet of you. Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Senga. It'll take longer to recover if you don't rest. It's true. So I'm just putting this carbon paper here. Of changing that color, making it less blue. So I'm going to take my black, need some more white. One of the good things, or at least helpful things with the way Kurelek painted here, is that because, like, he outlines everything in the same way that maybe a comic book artist might, and so that means that this is going to be very forgiving. We can paint or use, like, let's say, a Posca pen to outline all these shapes, and so if there is a little bit of sloppiness in terms of our color application, we can clean all that up with some outlines afterwards. So now I was thinking it should maybe be a little bit more yellowy brown as opposed to just gray, but that's okay. How about now? I'm going to take more of this white. So rather than just using pure white, I did sort of dilute it with a little bit of gray, just so it's not so glaring bright. I'm going to center it . Blow dry that. You guys are all so sweet. What great human beings you are, Stephanie and Singa and Barbara. I appreciate all the sincere caring and advice. So I'm just trying to think about the shadow here. Maybe I should have left that actually more white. Did I just use the hair dryer? I'm just going to blow dry this again. Oh yeah, Barbara, I think I'm gonna call it a night. Great to see you back painting, Michael. We all missed you. I was hoping you'd review the last two paintings from the feedback show, but they can wait. Take care. Ah, I forgot to do that. That's true. Okay. I gotta do that ASAP. Oh, just got an email from the school saying there's someone in my daughter's classroom that's got lice. Oh, oh my goodness. I hope we don't have lice in the house. Oh, that's so gross. Okay, so I might call it a day in a little bit here. I just want to, while I've got some of these colors mixed, I want to try to make most use of it, so that because I won't be able to match those colors again, and this is paint probably won't survive if I try to preserve it. So let's making a shadow here. Stephanie says I feel itchy now. Okay, so let's glaze a shadow. You know, my studio is getting really hot. That's also affecting the way I'm feeling. And it's causing my paints to dry really quickly. CMD says, that's it for me. I'm gonna go. Health is important, so hope you'll be completely healthy soon. Take care. Everyone's talking about lice now. Got everybody itching. Is the weather good? Well, it depends on where you are. I think lately here in Vancouver it's been a bit kind of rainy. Not super happy with that shadow, but I think it's okay. Okay, I think I have to call it a day. I am not feeling so great, so I'm going to call it a day. I'm not feeling super great at the moment, so just a quick reminder to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know when future episodes are going to take place, including part 2 to this episode. 80% of the people who watch these episodes are not subscribers, so that would be hugely helpful if you did that. If you want to support the channel with a small donation, a couple dollars, $5, to help keep the lights going on. I just bought a new camera the other day to keep this show going, so that would be helpful if you could help me cover some of those costs. You could scan that QR code and it'll take you to the PayPal page where you can donate to the channel to help keep all the lights on. Other ways you could support the channel is send an e-transfer or a check in the mail. All those links are down below. And I encourage you to join the Facebook group. Upload your artwork to the Facebook group so that I can give you some free feedback in the next bonus episode coming up. And as Barbara reminded me, there's a few that I forgot to finish on the last episode, so we want to get to those ASAP as well. That's what our Facebook group looks like. Thank you everyone for painting along with me today. I'm sorry I wasn't able to finish now, but we will finish this one, maybe even later tonight. If I get a second win, we'll do that. Until then, my friends, have a wonderful afternoon or morning, evening, wherever you are on our beautiful planet. And we shall see you again very soon. Take care, everybody. Have a great night, morning, wherever you are. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.